Well, hey, this morning we're continuing in Mark. We've been in Mark for some time, and Chris emailed me a while ago and talked to me about this passage. Just a few verses. I think it's 21 verses with three very interesting questions that groups of people pose to Jesus. And so I'll just be honest from the outset, we're going to kind of do a high-level view. We're not going to get into the super deep of each of these questions. But they're kind of those gotcha questions. Like these folks that were questioning Jesus had an agenda. They kind of were baiting it out there to where they could go, when you that first second you catch a fish when it's tapping on the line, and then you pull really fast to set the hook. It's kind of one of those moments. And those have happened in my life from time to time, where I've been caught, we'll say. One of those happened a couple months ago. I had come to church. My middle son, Blake, serves in some of the audiovisual stuff at church. And so he'll hang out afterwards and help kind of shut down some of the things and works up in one of the booths and helps with those things. And my wife had said to me, hey, I'm going to take the oldest and the youngest. I'm going to take Scott and Jax, and I'm going to go home. You have Blake. I was like, yeah, I got him. No problem. Yeah, I got him. It's good. So, and I was talking with someone in the middle of that, and I thought, okay, I got Blake. And so I kept talking and finishing up, and it was 12:45 or so, almost 1 o'clock, and I got in my truck and just drove home, and I was like, that was a great day at church. It was good, man, it was good. Lord was present, great coffee, good conversation. And I pull in my driveway. I live like 2.5, 3 minutes from church. I pull in my driveway, and my phone rings. I grab my phone and Blake. Oh. Hey, buddy. Dad, did you forget me? Yeah, I'll be right there. Yep, be right there. I'm on my way, bud. On my way. Be right there. This picture was texted to me while I was in my driveway. God bless Shalane Mast. She hung out with my kid, so I abandoned him in his time of need. And here's what the text said that accompanied that picture. Next screen, there we go. And the Parent of the Year of the Award goes to Bradley. And take that slide back for a second. She was home talking with her husband. She was home talking with her husband and to Nathan. And Nathan and Shalane have 5 kids. God bless you guys. I got 3, forgot 1. So they got 5 kids. She goes home, tells Nathan about this. You won't believe what Brad did at church. He left his kid. Imagine the trauma and the counseling Matt Cotton's going to have to do with him down the road to the counseling center and all these things. And so she's telling the funny story and shows the picture. And then their second child, Dirk, says this. Here's the next text I got from Shalane. OMG, I just got home telling Nate about leaving your kid. Dirk says he doesn't even have that many kids. I really don't know why I told you that story, but my 12-year-old Blake later that day said to me, you know what, Dad, make up for that? I said, what, Blake? In and out. I said, hey, that's cheaper than counseling down the road, so let's do that. So in my defense, the night before, so that was Sunday morning, Saturday I was in New York City with my son on his 8th grade trip to DC and New York. And we were to fly out of New York, at Newark in New Jersey, and that was in the middle of all that craziness that was going on in Newark Airport. We sat on the tarmac for 2.5 hours in an airplane. We left at 10 o'clock New York time. We got home at 5 a.m. I went to bed at 5:30. I got up at 7, jumped through the shower, came here. So on an hour and a half, only forgetting 1 kid, I felt pretty good about it, I'm not gonna lie. I got home and I was like, he's home finally, he'll be fine. But that's kind of the backstory to why that happened. I mean, I've forgotten him other places, I'm sure, but that was the reason for that one. But that was one of those just a few months ago where I kind of was like, oh, Blake got me. I'm dead in the water on this. I got no out. Yeah, I forgot you. That's why I just told him in the driveway. Yep, you're right there, son. I totally forgot you. But that's kind of what's happening in this passage that we see. And Chris talked about it last week, that these passages that we're in right now, chapter 11 and 12, is the last week of Jesus' life. And he re-enters Jerusalem in the temple courts. And they start questioning his authority. The Pharisees, the Sadducees, and the Herodians. We're going to talk about these three groups of people, and then some of a scribe in the third passage. But they start to question his authority. And last week, Chris talked about the reality that Jesus set these guys straight with the fig leaf illustration, that there was nothing inside of these folks. They didn't produce any fruit. They looked good on the outside and knew the 613 rabbinic laws, 613 laws, 365 of them negative, 248 of them positive. They knew all these things, but they were dead on the inside. They were the chief priests of the day, the law, knew the law in and out, wrote the law. And so when he was pushing back, they started to question him on some other things because their desire to arrest him and destroy him grew. And so these three questions kind of come out of that. And there's three questions that happen, but I'm going to answer it with these three thoughts. There's a question about blank in the first, there's a question about blank in the second, and a question about blank in the third. I know that doesn't help you right now, but we'll fill those in. So as we look at chapter 12 verses 13 through 17, it's the question of paying taxes to Caesar. Paying taxes to Caesar. Later, they sent some Pharisees and Herodians to Jesus to catch him in his words. And they came to him and said, "Teacher, we know that you are a man of integrity." Kind of setting him up a little bit, right? "We know you tell the truth. So answer this question. You aren't swayed by others because you pay no attention to who they are, but you teach the way of God in accordance with the truth. Is it right to pay the imperial tax to Caesar or not? Should we pay it or shouldn't we?" Now, a lot of us in here are like, I'm sick of taxes. I'm sick of the July 1st talk about the gas tax going up. I get it. It's not the question of how much. It's the question of should we. And the they in that is the chief priests. Those are the guys that went at Jesus, and he uses the fig leaf illustration, and now they got kind of answered to, and they needed someone else. So they sent the Pharisees and the Herodians, these two different types of groups of people. Interesting that it even says, and the Pharisees and the Herodians to Jesus to catch him. This isn't a friendly game of tag they're playing. They wanted to catch him to say something that was blasphemy or against the Old Testament or against the laws. And they could then arrest him and do away with him. So it's not just this friendly little game of tag, but they wanted to catch him in a lie. A couple things about the Pharisees and the Herodians. There's a quote that I read in the Moody Bible commentary. It says these two groups of unusual opponents, the Herodians, were always for the political status quo and were sympathetic to the Romans, while the Pharisees looked forward to the coming Messiah to remove Roman oppression. So they weren't for each other, but for this cause, they were willing to jump in the same boat. They were willing to put aside their very strong theological differences in this first century and go after Jesus. And we'll see that with the Sadducees as well. This bond for their hate for Jesus brought them together. But Jesus knew their hypocrisy, and this is what he said. "Why are you trying to trap me? Why are you trying to catch me?" he asked. "Bring me a denarius and let me look at it." They brought the coin, and he asked, "Whose image is this? And whose inscription?" "Caesar," they replied. Then Jesus said to them, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." And they were amazed at him. So here's a picture of what the coin looked like back in that day. Tiberius Caesar is who they're speaking of. He was in charge in Rome from 14 to 37 AD. So this was the coin that was after him, and this is the very thing that they were talking about. This was about a day's wage for the average person. Again, the average person. Not those on the high end or those on the low end, but just the average wage. Should we give this back to Caesar? And Jesus' response is, this is his coin. If he's asking you to give the tax, then to give to Caesar. It's his authority. You obviously believe in it a bit because you use it to get goods and services. Similar to us. We use the dollar. We obviously believe in that system of finance. You may not have a dollar in your wallet. You might just have a bunch of plastic things or a phone that you tap on. But we still use those. We believe in that, and we submit to that authority of the finance of currency. Jesus says towards the end of that, and Jesus said, "Give back to Caesar what is Caesar's, and to God what is God's." The give back word there is this word called render. To give something an acknowledgement or dependence or obligation. It's even to obey the laws that are set ahead by that authority that govern the land in which we live. We should obey the law that the Lord has allowed the government to be in our country. So I told you I'm a recovering youth pastor. Years ago when I took a bunch of students, for years we took students to Mexico. A kid came up to me, one of his boys, and said, "Hey, Brad." I said, "Yeah? Will you help me get something across the border?" "Excuse me?" "Yeah." "Like what?" And from behind him, he pulls out a machete. "I just bought this." And I just looked at him and I said, "Son, I know your parents. I will be happy to inform that you are in the custody of the Border Patrol, and I am leaving you there." That will be my response. "So you mean I can't bring it home?" "No." "Well, what do I do with it?" "I really don't know at this point. Go give it back to the man, saying that was a donation to your shop, and walk away." That was my advice. But just because you're out of the country doesn't mean we don't obey the laws of our land. We're not trying to smuggle this back. We obey the law of the land. We're obligated to that because we should be people of integrity as Christians. We shouldn't be swayed or set our morals aside because of who we're dining with or who we're vacationing with or who we're making a deal with. The Pharisees and Herodians make that integrity comment, but I think it's fascinating because it applies to us as well as we live our daily lives, not just when we answer biblical questions. So give to Caesar what is Caesar's. It's a question about responsibility in the end of it. Let me read this quote from Warren Wiersbe. "Caesar's image is on the coins, so they must be minted by his authority. The fact that you possess these coins and use them indicates that you think they are worth something. Therefore, you are already accepting Caesar's authority, or you would not use the money. But don't forget that you were created in the image of God and therefore must live under God's authority as well." So Mark 12, 13 through 17, it's a question about responsibility. It's a question about responsibility. It's funny, the whole giving back to Caesar or giving to God. Because I got a buddy of mine that's a good friend, and he lives near me. Every so often we'll bump into each other and he'll say, he calls me pastor because he attends here. He calls me pastor. "Pastor!" And I'll respond to him, parishioner, church attender. And he says to me, he goes, hey, I got a question for you. This is a couple months ago. He goes, I got a question for you. He goes, a buddy of mine said to me that the Bible doesn't say how much one should tithe. Like there's no 10% in the Bible. What do you say? I was like, well, shoot. Seminary was a very long time ago. I said, hey, I got to get back to you on that. So I did. I came back to my office and grabbed out my study materials and started looking into the Old Testament and the New Testament. And right away, there's 4 scriptures that talk about this word tithing in the very beginning of the first 5 books of the Bible. And there they are. And they use the word tithe. So I was like, well, what is that in the Hebrew? What word is used there? Because you always kind of go back to the original. And here's the word that's translated, the word tithe in Hebrew. It's maser is the word. Here is the Greek imagery of it, or the words, Hebrew. It's a Hebrew word, but it's pronounced maser. And it literally means a 10th part. A 10th part. If we had a pie and I slice it up into 10 pieces, the tithe would be the one slice, a 10th of the part of the whole. But don't get caught up on the 10%, I would tell you. Don't get caught up on the 10%. It's more about the giving. It's about the heart. Pastor Chris and I were having this conversation not long ago. It's not about the percentage. It's about the gift or the giving. And so many times we get caught up in the legalese and the exacts. And it might be 8%, it might be 4%, it might be 6%, it might be 20%. Don't worry about the percent. It might be the tithe of prayer in your time. It might be the gift of your talents. It might be the gift of the things that you own, your spaces. There's some talents and gifts that you have that are way better than mine. I promise you, you do not want me up here leading worship. I was at a camp one time speaking. A camp band leader came up to me and I was a speaker. I was sitting over here in the first row in the first seat. He came up to me and said, hey, Brad, I really appreciate you sitting in the front row. I was like, hey, happy to. I was waiting for a compliment. He's like, hey, can I ask you a favor? And I was like, oh, he wants me to sing. He could hear my voice from the front row. Not bad. He goes, don't clap. I said, what do you mean don't clap? He goes, because you clap off beat, you're getting my drummer off beat. I said, you need to find a new drummer. Don't get caught up on the percent. Use your gifts, use your talents. But the thing that I remembered after I was talking to my buddy, I went back and we were talking about it later. It just reminded me, the answer's in here. It's all in the book. When the buddy says, hey, check the book. You hear me say something? Check the book. It's all in here. I was like, It's in the book. The question of responsibility. Don't forget that you were created in the image of God. I know we get caught up on that percent, but don't forget you're created in the image of God, and therefore must live under His authority as well. Realize you're His. Realize you're His. Hey, that second question they ask is in verse 18. It's entitled The Marriage at the Resurrection. And the Sadducees, we see that the Pharisees and the Herodians didn't have any success. So the leaders, they're like, hey, let's send in the Sadducees. We'll send those guys in. They're a different political, theological bent, so let's send them over. And they don't believe in the resurrection. They came to him with this question. Teacher, they said, Moses wrote for us that if a man's brother dies, let me stop right there. There's a couple things to realize about the Sadducees. This is the only mention of the Sadducees in the whole book of Mark, but They only believed in the law of Moses. That's why it's interesting that they say Moses said, because they're quoting Moses in Leviticus and in Deuteronomy. But they only accepted or believed in the law of Moses, which is the first 5 books of the Bible, otherwise known as the Torah, Genesis through Deuteronomy, and that was their religious authority. Okay? They didn't believe in any other parts of the Old Testament, just Genesis through Deuteronomy. They didn't believe in the resurrection. They didn't believe in angels. They didn't believe in final judgment. They didn't believe in demons, and that's referenced in Acts. But what they're referring to is this passage in Deuteronomy 25 that they bring up. It says this: if brothers are living together and one of them dies without a son, his widow must not marry outside the family. Her husband's brother shall take her and marry her, and fulfill the duty of the brother-in-law to her. The first son she bears shall carry the name of the dead brother, so that his name will not be blotted from Israel. This is known as the Levirate marriage. So they're quoting this Deuteronomy passage. They're trying to trap Jesus, trying to catch Jesus with this idea about marriage and eternity, even though they don't believe in it. It's interesting. Pharisees, Herodians, Sadducees, they didn't agree on anything in a lot of ways, but they all wanted the destruction of Jesus. So they all come together to try and catch Jesus in this blasphemy with these set-up questions. Now, this is like Giants and A's fans coming together. I mean, I'll come together with an A's fan to root against the Dodgers. I think most of us will. Most of us are okay with that. It's like Warriors and Kings fans coming together to go against the Lakers. I say Lakers, Chris isn't here, and he loves the Lakers. So I'm okay with that while he's gone. But it's the reality of these folks coming together that really don't have anything in common other than just let's go against Jesus. And so that's kind of what happens in this whole deal. And Jesus' reply is this: are you not in error because you do not know the scriptures or the power of God? When the dead rise, they will neither marry nor be given in marriage. They will be like angels in heaven. They will be like angels in heaven. The power of God is giving dead things life. It's the gospel. Jesus came, lived a sacrificial life, died on the cross. The power of God rose him from the dead that you and I may live too. Eternally. Not just here, but eternally. Because the Sadducees didn't believe in an afterlife. Hence why Jesus talks about the dead will rise. And they'll be like angels. Funny, he throws it right back at them, because angels are eternal beings. And those that will rise and those that are saved will be eternal beings. I'm not going to get into the whole marriage thing this morning. We just don't have time to get into all that. But it's the focus on that these people are eternal that know the death and resurrection of Jesus. He makes dead things live. That's the power of God. Not that we're dead to sin or that we're conquered by sin. He's conquered sin. Now he goes on and kind of uses the books of Moses to get them. In verse 26, now about the dead rising. Have you not read in the book of Moses, the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible, in the account of the burning bush, how God said, I am the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, the God of Jacob. He is not the God of the dead, but the God of the living. You are badly mistaken. He's the God of the living, not the God of the dead. The I am is a big piece. He could have just said, I was. No, I am the God of the living. Hence Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. One of the things you do as a pastor, and I've done, I can't tell you how many, is funerals. And at some point, you and I will all have a funeral for us. There is coming a day. And if you go to a funeral that I ever do, there's a really good chance you'll hear me quote this quote. It's by a guy by the name of Howard Hendricks. He was a Dallas Theological Seminary professor for decades and a brilliant Bible teacher. And he says this, and I say this at most every funeral I've ever done. Most people think that we are in the land of the living, headed toward the land of the dead. But nothing could be further from the truth. We are in the land of the dying, headed towards the land of the living. That's the God we serve. That's the God we gave our life to. The Jesus we trust as our Lord and Savior. Not one that doesn't conquer sin and death, but one that has conquered sin and death. And that's what Jesus is saying to these Sadducees. If you ask me to do your funeral, I'll read that statement. Because that's the truth. And that's what Jesus is saying. We're eternal beings. There's no need for reproduction in heaven, hence marriage. That's why God created marriage in Genesis. We'll leave that alone for another topic, another day. It's a question about eternity. These Sadducees point to Jesus. It's a question about eternity. And glory is coming one day. My question is, where will you spend eternity? Have you surrendered your life to the God of this universe, asking Jesus to be the Lord of your life? As Warren Wiersbe said in that commentary quote, realize that you're his creation. Realize that you're his creation. The last question is this, the greatest commandment. One of the teachers of the law, I find it fascinating, one of the teachers of the law, so they've given up on the Pharisees, they've given up on the Herodians, they've given up on the Sadducees. Now they said, let's just send one of the teachers, one of the scribes. If you read different translations, it says one of the scribes. So one of the teachers of the law came and heard them debating. Noting that Jesus had given them a good answer, noting that Jesus had given them a good answer, he asked, of all the commandment, which is the most important? Jesus answered, the most important is this one. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind, and with all your strength. So again, Jesus, knowing that the Herodians, Pharisees, and Sadducees are still listening to all this, even though they don't all agree, he goes back to the Torah, the first 5 books of the Bible. This is in Deuteronomy chapter 6. It's called the Shema. But he also answers it with the Leviticus passage in 19, love your neighbor as yourself. He says this, the second, love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these. He's not saying this is the first or the second or the third or the fourth or fifth or sixth. No, these are the greatest two. These are the two that all humanity, all human beings should ascribe to. Now, in first century, there was definitely a feeling of love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. And Jesus is pulling these two together because neighbor is anyone you come in contact with, anyone you know. And we remember in Matthew 5 where Jesus talks about love your enemy and pray for those who persecute you. They're your neighbor as well. So love your neighbor as yourself. Love the Lord your God love the Lord your God. The Lord is one. Love the Lord with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your strength, and all your mind. When Jesus had answered them wisely, he said to them, "You are not far from the kingdom of God." And from then, no one dared ask him any more questions. It's kind of like that mic drop moment. It's like, boom, answer number 3, what's next? And none of them wanted to ask anything else. None of them wanted to ask him anything else. I'm going to jump down 2 slides, and I'm going to read this quote by Warren Wiersbe. If we love God, we will experience his love within, and we'll express that love to others. We do not live by rules, but by relationships. A loving relationship to God that enables us to have loving relationships with others. If we love God, we'll experience his love within, and we'll express that love to others. We do not live by the rules, but by relationships. A loving relationship to God that enables us to have loving relationships with others. Why is that important? Because in those relationships, we have influence with people who are eternal, either eternal in heaven or eternal separation from God. As he answers with, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your mind, with all your soul, and with all your strength, it made me stop in my office and think, what is keeping me? What is distracting me from knowing him more? So I just kind of sat in my office and thought for a few minutes this week and last week and thought, what is keeping me from loving him more? What is keeping me from knowing him more? What is keeping me from developing more understanding of God's word? And the 2 first things that popped into my head were 2 things that I kind of find myself with most all the time. Computer for work, that's a reality, and then this thing. What distracts me or keeps me from fellowship with the Father? These 2 things. I don't know what the 2 things are in your life that keep you distracted or keep fellowship from the Father. But I know I got to do a better job with these 2 things of boundaries. There's an old clip that I'm going to show you that kind of gives us a little bit of perspective in this idea of what distracts us or keeps us from fellowship. Take a minute, then I'll come back and we'll wrap up. Now, I know the times are different for some of us with dress, all those things. The average person in America today spends 5 hours and 16 minutes attached to their phone. That's a 14% increase. It's equal to 1 day per week, 70 days per year. That video you saw, I think, was in 2002 or 2003, when we had phones with really long cords on it. You'd take it and fall all the way around the corner so your mom couldn't hear you or your brothers couldn't hear you. I thought of that because when I was studying this, when I was thinking about all this stuff, when I kept coming back to the Shema, I was sitting in my office and I looked up and I saw a picture in my office. And this picture sits in my office with this old dude and these 4 young guys. These are my 4 roommates from my senior year in college, and it's a little blurry, but you kind of get the idea. I'm on the far right. On the far left, complete opposite of that, is my roommate that year, but all 4 of us lived in a suite. His name's Adam Hansel. He's an FBI agent. Then Dave Ludy has the sunglasses on. He's a junior high teacher in Salem, Oregon. Then Matt Will, that's his wedding. We were at Matt's wedding. That was July of 2006. I love Matt. I just actually saw him when I was back in DC. He works for a nonprofit that serves the world through Catholic charities. That was Matt's wedding. July of 2006, 3:30 in the afternoon, Redding, California. 117 degrees. I texted him the other day and said, what was the temperature? I know it felt like Hades, and he didn't hesitate. It was 117, and he had to wear that brown jacket. We had the shirts on. But he said, there will be a breeze. There was no breeze that day. It was miserable. But the older gentleman, a guy by the name of Mike Gower, he was the associate dean at the university we all went to, Simpson University up in Redding, California. And Mike was one of the wisest, neatest old dudes I've ever met in my life. He was our mentor. All four of us went to him every week and spent time in his office or walking the campus talking life. I miss Mike. Mike died probably in, I think it was 2010, 2011. Mike was a recovering youth pastor as well. He ended up on a college campus, him and his wife loving college students. We'd end up usually talking about girls and dating. But he always left us with one question. And that question hangs in my office to this day. And this is the question. There's a picture in my office next to this, and it says this. The problem is not having fellowship with the Father. The problem is, what is keeping me from fellowshipping with the Father? The problem is not having fellowship with the Father. The problem is what's keeping me from fellowshipping with the Father. These three groups of people, they thought they knew. They thought they knew better. I wish they would have known Jesus and not just knew about Jesus. Wish they would have knew and had a relationship with Jesus, not out just to get Jesus. But as I think about life, I often think I know better too. But what I need is to just be more in the Word and more with God in quiet and stillness in life. And that's what Mike wanted us to realize. He was in his 70s when he was working at the school, and he knew what was important. And yeah, all those things to us 22 and 23 and 24-year-olds that we were walking through and struggling through, he knew about. But he wanted us with the Father, in fellowship with the Father, that we might love him with all of our soul, with all of our strength, with all of our mind, and all of our heart. So he always would ask us, what's keeping you from fellowship? And that was the simple phrase he would say, what's keeping you from fellowship? So I ask you this morning, what's keeping you from fellowship? Because when I read these three groups of people, they got so distracted. And I get so distracted as well. But what's keeping you from fellowship? May we be a community of believers, a church that acknowledges we don't know better, but instead surrender to his way and his will.